when we are in a moment where the government is selling us on wars, it is helpful to know how much it sounds like what has been sold to us before.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. Coming up on this week's episode, what's at stake if we start to lose the history of the internet online, how a sneaker company is trying to get in on the AI boom with an unexpected pivot, and what an AI tribunal company wants to do to intimidate the mainstream news.
We're also going to chat about Apple's amazing environmental report card, which chatbot can write most like humans, and the PEI group that's unpacking the history of one of America's favorite songs on stages around the world. So let's get into the headlines.
Newsfeed.
Well, in a sign that AI might be taking over everything in time, the American footwear company Allbirds, which was quite popular amongst the Silicon Valley crowd, as well as being worn by Barack Obama and Leonardo DiCaprio, for its merino wool sneakers, has just announced that it is going to pivot to become, wait for it, an AI compute infrastructure provider.
This is such a bizarre story. In addition to a $50 million outside investment, the company sold most of its assets last month for around $39 million and will move forward under the new name New Bird AI. As the company wrote, they, and I'm quoting here, will initially seek to acquire high-performance, low-latency AI compute hardware and provide access under long-term lease arrangements, meaning customer demand that spot markets and hyperscalers are unable to reliably service.
And there are increasing numbers of stories reporting on the dwindling consumer confidence in AI, and I can't imagine that this kind of nonsense will help improve that. I mean, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta, as we've talked about lots, are expected to spend around $700 billion building out their AI infrastructure in 2026. So I'm not really sure what an $89 million spending from an ex-shoe company is going to accomplish. It's very weird to me.
I kept checking if it was April 1st because it felt like that. Well, in terms of AI companies that didn't start out as fashion brands, new research from open resource applications shows that if you want your AI writing to go undetected, then your best choice of chatbot is actually Google's Gemini. The project told a dozen AI systems to write a human-sounding article and then ran those through several detection algorithms. The results really varied between detection platforms, but Gemini was flagged as the least like the least like AI.
And it should be noted that that doesn't mean that Gemini necessarily writes better. It's just less easily detected because of the variability in how it structures sentences and things like that. So, and if you're looking for the detection tool that was fooled the least, that'd be GPT-0. Although the expectations are that all of these tools will struggle to detect non-human writing as AI improves. And that's going to cause some major problems, especially in the area of education.
Well, in other disturbing AI news, it looks like a new company called Objection.ai has been formed that will allow people who feel unfairly slighted by media coverage to pay as little as $2,000 to have what they call an AI tribunal evaluate their claim by examining relevant documents and producing a public judgment within a few days. Well, this might seem like a great way for people to not have to invest large amounts of money and time to challenge media coverage. A look at who's behind the company certainly gives us a lot of cause for concern.
Yeah, no kidding. The founder of Objection AI is Aaron D'Souza, who you may remember as also founding the upcoming Enhanced Games in Las Vegas, which is vaguely an Olympics knockoff that actually encourages the use of performance-enhancing drugs by its athletes, which is kind of like that classic all-drug Olympics skit from Saturday Night Live in the late 80s. And I'm going to bet that the writers who wrote that never thought it had actually happened, but here we are. D'Souza also helped lead the lawsuit that bankrupted the celebrity-focused blog Gawker, and he was joined in that effort by none other than the Trump-loving co-founder and chairman of spy tech company Palantir, Peter Thiel. You know, the guy who said that democracy and freedom are incompatible, amongst his many other concerning activities. So this comes across to me as just another cog in the quickly expanding U.S. bully industrial complex.
And for those of you who are not familiar with Palantir, I'll just note that they played a significant role in Trump's U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's crackdown on allegedly illegal immigrants, as well as working closely with the Israeli military. And Jeff, you're not alone in your concerns about Thiel's company, who most recently has drawn the fury of many MPs in Britain who are demanding that their government scrap its contract with Palantir because Palantir shouldn't, and I'm quoting here, be trusted as a custodian of the intimate health records of tens of millions of British citizens.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with them. And what they're talking about here is Palantir's supplier role for the British National Health Services Federated Data Platform. So tons of user data there. And Palantir is fighting back using, let's again talk about questionable associates, the political strategist of former British PM and total nincompoop Boris Johnson. So I guess that kind of comes full circle back to where the real impetus for Objection AI probably lies in protecting the rich and powerful while intimidating those who might investigate them into not taking action at all.
And I might note the first time we've said nincompoop on the show. So you never know what's going to come out during these headlines. Let's pop back across the pond to the U.S., where a different dependency on yet another tech billionaire of questionable morals has been raised. In this case, the U.S. military's use of Elon Musk's Starlink service. It's been revealed that a test of U.S. Navy drones last summer resulted in dozens of them being left bobbing uselessly in the ocean for an hour, unable to be reached after a global Starlink outage. Opponents say that this shows the danger that a single point of failure can have for essential military operations. To say nothing of the fact that the owner of the service previously purposefully shut it down himself in the case, I think we talked about this on the show, of Ukraine's military use of Starlink last year.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's not many other places to go right now. Starlink currently has a near monopoly in this area, but as we also reported recently, Amazon is entering that space with its own satellite solution. And really, I think the sooner that happens, the better, especially when we see actions like China's latest demo of an undersea cable cutter that can reportedly reach depths of 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles beneath the ocean. And those kind of cables can be used for like data, internet connectivity, as well as electricity, including getting offshore renewable energy to shore. And China has been accused of purposely damaging these kind of cables in the Baltic Sea and around Taiwan in the recent past, leading to loss of connectivity and some very expensive and time-consuming repairs.
Definitely not a comforting declaration by China, but let's come back to Canada for some good news in quantum computing. As reported by our friends over at BetaKit, Quebec's SB Quantum is expanding into the United States after closing 5.5 million Canadian in seed funding. They've also put 2 of their quantum diamond magnetometers in space recently, which are intended to, as BetaKit describes, replace or augment existing navigation systems in contested or degraded environments using the Earth's magnetic field.
It's very cool, and this is so great. SB Quantum's co-founder explained why, saying, quote, "It takes seconds to jam or spoof GPS," which is already happening in Ukraine and in the Baltic states. We know that GPS is not reliable in a conflict zone. We also know that magnetic navigation cannot be jammed or distorted, so it's a legitimate solution for real challenges in the field. It's also useful for navigating the Arctic, as well as undersea navigation where GPS does not provide the entire picture, end quote.
Awesome. And in fact, Canada's defense industrial strategy has declared that quantum sensors are a key sovereign capability, and SB Quantum will be mounting them on aircraft, ships, and submarines, saying it is uniquely positioned to become a global leader in this space. And speaking of space, we recently covered the Artemis 2 mission, which was just incredible. And now the White House Office of Science and Technology has posted that they want to put nuclear reactors into orbit by 2028 and on the surface of the moon by 2030.
Yeah, so this is really part of developing a permanent presence on the moon, and the U.S. is working hard to beat China in that particular race. Now, I totally get that this is going to give some people the heebie-jeebies, but nuclear power has come a long way in terms of safety, And frankly, there really isn't anything that's comparably dependable like all the time in space. You can't use solar all the time. There's a bunch of other complications. So nuclear is really the solution there. And frankly, I've said this before, but I think environmentalists' rejection of nuclear power has been a serious misstep that's just allowed more and more fossil fuel use. So here's hoping this will lead to increased usage of nuclear power, not just in space, but here on Earth. Just maybe let's not put it in the path of earthquakes and tsunami like was the case in the Fukushima disaster.
And speaking of the environment, let's end on a story that we can all really celebrate. Apple has announced that it used 30% recycled materials across all of the products shipped in 2025, which is an enormous accomplishment that we would really love more tech companies to consider
Mhm.
pursuing. In fact, right now, if you're watching the YouTube version of the show, you will see that I am using my new MacBook Neo. And I did not know this, Jeff. So thank you for informing me that it contains a full 60% recycled content. So that is even more impressive.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just great. So there's lots more to talk about with Apple and environmentalism beyond that, but a few different stats are Apple now uses 100% fiber-based packaging. That means no plastics at all in its packaging anymore. It's even its stores, for example, its Apple Fifth Avenue store diverts over 90% of its waste from landfills. And Apple is committed to carbon neutrality across its entire corporate footprint by 2030. So, well done, Tim Cook. The world could use more CEOs with that kind of focus on the public good. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about another important public good that is at risk. We'll be talking with David Sirota about how the torching of the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine is like the burning of the Library of Alexandria. That's up next.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
David Sirota is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author. He was nominated for an Academy Award for his work helping Adam McKay create the story for the blockbuster film Don't Look Up, which became one of the most widely viewed movies in Netflix's history. David is now the host of a weekly podcast, Lever Time, and he joined Amber to talk about what's at stake if media giants continue to destroy the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, a website that's essential to our digital memory.
Media Matters.
David, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to break down what's happening right now with the Wayback Machine. And I was reading your blog post where you said the archive's work is more important than ever in a goldfish brain society whose attention economy generally makes us forget our entire world every 15 minutes. So let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're in this world where there's we're all caught in these news cycles where it's very easy to forget what happened very recently, much less in the distant past. And so the Internet Archive is an example of something that actually gives all of us access to the short and long term past, at least in terms of digital history. And I think if that goes away, we lose a tool that helps us validate whether what's being said in the present accurately reflects what happened in the past. The Internet Archive is the kind of place where if somebody says in the present, this or that politician said this, or this or that thing happened in Congress or in a state legislature, you can actually go back into the Internet Archive and figure out if that's true. If that gets wiped away, it's harder to know whether what's being said in the here and now has any basis in historical fact. And I think that what's scary about this is that if that goes away, I think there are a lot of powerful forces that would prefer us not to remember the medium term and long term past. They sort of want us to be living in whatever current version of reality they are creating. And a lot of my work as a journalist is about asking the questions of how is what is happening right now, how did the past lead us to this point, the point of knowing that is to know what kinds of mistakes should we try to avoid in the here and now, rather than thinking that everything that we're experiencing now has just been created right now.
It's interesting too, from the context of a journalist, because there are so many scenarios that we wouldn't hear about on a day to day basis as far as how journalists are using this incredible tool. I'm thinking of a story I just read about a journalist in Vancouver who had written a story where the Vancouver Police Department said, oh, we didn't say that. And then the journalist was able to go into the Internet Archive through the Wayback Machine and see that in fact they did publish a press release where they said something. And it's really important, I think, to your point, in this age where people are struggling to understand what's real and what's not. This layer, I think, of AI has made things even worse. So, can you talk a little bit more in terms of the role that this platform plays for journalists?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you gave a great example of an official government source said they didn't say something. Actually, you did say those things. I think that it's like that across everything. Um, I think I'll give you an example of something that I think has been completely memory hold. And maybe it's just because I'm old enough to remember this, but the entire lead up to the Iraq War and what was said in the lead up to the Iraq War, uh, many of the things that have been said in the lead up to many wars end up proving to be not true. Um, and I think when we are in a moment where the government is selling us on wars, it is helpful to know how much it sounds like what has been sold to us before. And I think if you don't have that historical record to point out, they're saying the same things that were said a generation ago or 2 generations ago. If you can't actually document that, if you can't illustrate that, then it's easier for the people in power who are trying to sell us on things right now to get away with it. And again, I think there's like the old adage, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And then there's the idea that history may not match, but it may rhyme. I just think that the Internet Archive is an example of the digital library that we're all relying on. I mean, my metaphor that I used in the article was it's kind of like the Internet Age's Library of Alexandria. And for those who don't know that history, the burning of the Library of Alexandria is seen as one of the most catastrophic losses of knowledge in human history. Now, to be clear, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, that wasn't a sort of one-time catastrophic event. It was actually there was a fire at the Library of Alexandria, but it sort of gradually declined over decades and centuries. And I think what we're looking at now is that the Internet Archive, as far as I can tell right now, is not going to be a flip of a switch and shut off. But if news outlets, big corporate news giants, start limiting the archive's ability to archive and preserve the news that's being reported, over time, the archive will be degraded. And I just want to add one other point here, that this is all in the context of so much human knowledge now being in digital form as opposed to in paper form. Now, there's a lot of benefits to that, right? It's searchable, keyword searchable, et cetera, et cetera. But there is one major downside, and it's the erosion of digital knowledge is a very real thing. You can see it. Anybody who's watching this, listening to this, can see it when they're on reading an article from 5 or 7 years ago, and there's a link, and they click the link, and the link is gone. Right? That's called link rot. The sort of disappearing nature of digital information, accidentally or purposefully, right? There's that whole other part of this where you've seen Hollywood studios remove content from old shows, old archives from their streaming services, disappeared, never to be heard from again. I think we need to understand this as an erasure of human knowledge that is really, really dangerous. I mean, it's not just like, hey, I want to go stream some old episodes of, Family Ties or Seinfeld. I mean, that's a bummer. It's also like I can't access the medical studies, the scientific studies that might inform me, if you're working in a lab, what you're doing. It's all of that at just an enormous society-wide scale, with the Internet Archive being the biggest example of the kind of repository that we need now more than ever.
I think one of the things that is so interesting about what's happening right now, when you mentioned some of these big media companies like the New York Times, is that this blocking is happening because, of course, they are worried about AI scraping their stories. And so the intentions of some of these big media companies isn't necessarily a thing where they don't want people to get information. They're worried about these systems that have taken over all of our online experiences. Can you talk a little bit about what would be a solution to that when you think about the power of these AI tools and the fact that these media companies, many of whom are already kind of being impacted in terms of growing in this day and age?
The central problem with big tech's AI scheme is that they scrape information into the AI brain, if you will, and then when the AI spits it back to users, AI is under no obligation to point people to with links and the like, to the source of the information. So if you're trying to fund a news outlet, which I am the creator and founder of an independent investigative journalism outlet called The Lever, as an example, one of the ways that we fund our work is people come to our site, they see the stories that we're doing, they decide to become paying subscribers. If an AI robot scrapes all of our work and then presents it effectively just as unattributed knowledge without linking back to our site, then our company, our outlet, having funded the investigative journalism, uh, has no way to tell people using the information, hey, if you want more of this, you should fund the kind of work that we do. So ultimately, over the course of years and decades, if this is the way things are going to go, the question becomes, well, who's going to fund the actual obtaining of the information that the AI is relying on? In other words, we get, if you game this out enough, you get to a point where the AI doesn't have any new human knowledge because it's effectively served to defund the collection of that human knowledge. Now, your question of how do you prevent that? I think that's a great question. And I don't purport to be a technologist, but I will say this. I certainly believe in the era of artificial intelligence approaching theoretically artificial general intelligence. There's theories it's going to be artificial super intelligence. We're sending people around the moon, et cetera, et cetera. Like, this is a solvable problem, right? There must be a solvable way to allow the Internet Archive to preserve an archive in perpetuity of human knowledge in a way that doesn't have the Internet Archive be able to be exploited by AI, that effectively aims to defund the original collection of information, aka journalism. Right? The big tech guys, they don't care about journalism. They care about monetizing attention effectively. And so I understand the idea that we don't want to allow big tech to effectively have its business model defund something like journalism. There definitely has to be a technological solution here.
I don't think there's a perfect answer to this question right now, but as someone who went to journalism school, has worked for many years as a journalist, I certainly appreciate the importance of what you're doing and investigative journalism. But there's a lot of people, when I have these conversations, they don't seem to really understand the role that journalism plays in our society, especially when it comes to our democracy and building trust and holding governments accountable. So what do you think's happening in this moment of time where that's something that is underappreciated?
I think it is underappreciated. Well, I think one explanation is we are now in an age where people value or hate accountability journalism that holds power accountable, depending on whether it's holding their allies accountable or who they perceive to be their enemies accountable. Um, if you are a Republican in America right now, rank and file Republican, um, partisan media is trying to teach you that anybody who reports anything factual that holds Republican politicians accountable, that is bad. And that accountability journalism, good accountability journalism, is only that kind of journalism that's aimed at the Democrats. By the way, same thing on the other side. That sort of the Democratic partisan media information ecosystem is trying to tell you that good journalism is that holds Republican politicians accountable, but not Democratic politicians accountable. And I think what's lost in that um, partisan tribal atmosphere is that journalism is supposed to hold power of all stripes accountable. That is its role in the democracy. And that has been devalued by the idea of seeing information and journalism as a weapon rather than as a public service. And I'm not sure how to rebuild the idea that journalism is supposed to be a check on power of all stripes, but that's what it's supposed to be. And I guess I will add one thing. I think major news outlets have contributed to the credibility gap problem by various high profile situations in which the news outlets were siding with power in ways that harmed a lot of people. I go back to the Iraq War. I mean, the news media played a big role in helping lie America into one of the most disastrous military conflicts in modern history. The news media helped uh, 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 promote a set of deregulatory financial policies that ultimately ended up in a catastrophic financial crisis. And I think over time, people have come to distrust what major media are telling them because they've experienced a lived reality in which those lies have harmed them.
I also think that we can't underestimate the impact that many of these big tech companies and powerful billionaire tech leaders are having on the way that we get information. You touched on this a little bit, and I'm just reminded because on this episode of our show, we're also talking about a startup that just launched called Objection, backed by Peter Thiel, which is holding AI tribunals. So if you've been wronged by mainstream media, you will have an opportunity to have some type of case that is fought via AI, and you can potentially be, I guess, righted. I don't know what the goal is, but this is a very bizarre timeline that we're in.
It really is, and again I think we are in the middle of what I think you can credibly call it a set of information wars. Like information has become now. It has always been in some ways a weapon, but it is really weaponized now in a way that's terrifying. And again, to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier, I think that if we then lose even more of a set of facts that we can all agree are facts, uh, that's not going to go in the right direction. I mean, listen. I think that it's not to say that earlier times were always better. They weren't. I don't idealize the past, but I do think it's fair to say that in previous eras, one thing we could rely on is that there was a set of facts that we all basically agreed on, and then we would debate what to do about those facts, what to do about those conditions. That has broken down. And I think the positive side of that is that some of the facts that we relied on before weren't actually facts. They were spun, they were half truths, they were selectively picked. The downside of it is that there's no stipulated facts anymore. I mean, we're in the middle of a climate crisis. We're in the middle of all sorts of crises that the basic facts are verifiable and demonstrable. We're not really talking about solutions. We're still arguing about what is fact, what isn't, and that's probably a pretty bad situation. Um, and so I will say, to make the problem worse by degrading preserved facts, by degrading the archive that is supposed to be preserving an old set of facts that we at least used to be able to agree on, will only make this worse.
Now, there has been some momentum in terms of people signing on to this letter to try to ensure that these big media companies perhaps are going to change their minds on blocking the internet archive. Um, do you see this as something where enough people are speaking up where they can actually affect change?
That's the hope. Now, my hope is that a lot of journalists speak out about this, and that a lot of journalists at these outlets speak out about this, and that prompts those outlets to make the investments necessary to find a middle ground here, right? Like to find the Goldilocks zone where the information is preserved and publicly available, and those outlets can also be remunerated for their work in the right way, and aren't cut out of essentially their business by big tech's predatory business. I really am confident that there are solutions to that technological problem. And I do think that ultimately, even the higher ups in large news outlets are sympathetic to the idea that we shouldn't be effectively torching or degrading the libraries that we rely on. And I should add one other thing. A lot of these outlets are relying on the archive in their own reporting, right? I mean, I could tell you at least once, twice, three times a week for the stories that I'm reporting. When I want to go verify a fact about a story I'm writing here in the present, I need that kind of archive to make sure that what I'm saying is true, and to double check what people are saying here in the present comports with what is an accurate reflection of what happened in the past. So I would say that journalism as a whole has a self-interest, because this is in part the way we report stories. It's a resource for us.
Yeah, and I probably have a lot more faith in some of these media organizations than the tech companies, and maybe I'm
Yes.
just bitter being here in Canada, where our government tried to hold tech companies like Meta and Google accountable in terms of the fact that they're profiting off the sharing of content, including from local news organizations. And as you probably know, Meta has been blocking news on Instagram and Facebook in Canada now for well over a year, and so Canadians are actually being deprived of local news, and that doesn't seem to be something that's going to end anytime soon. But I will say one thing: I am a little bit encouraged by people like you and these media organizations, like these smaller investigative groups that are launching to play a role to be able to ensure that the truth does get out there.
Well, I appreciate that. And look, my hope for media in general is that we are that there uh, we get to a place where there are lots of small and medium-sized outlets, that we can defy some of the oligopolistic and monopolistic trends throughout the whole economy and even in the media industry. I mean, we are watching in real time an oligarch-backed effort to really consolidate as much of media as possible, at a time when, technologically speaking, perhaps not business-wise, but just in terms of the sheer technology, it's easier to launch something with reach than ever. I mean, you're still fighting the algorithms, but you don't need a printing press. You don't need, right? I mean, so there's all these cross currents. There's mergers making it sort of monopolizing market share. There's algorithms that shadow ban certain content and amplify content that the oligarchy wants amplified. But it's also easier than ever to have information widely available to everyone on the planet who has an internet connection. And my hope is, out of all of that, that we get to a place where there are more small and medium sized independent reader and listener and viewer supported outlets that are able to compete with the much larger outlets. That is a healthy media ecosystem that I've just described, because there's competition. There's going to be a diversity of information. And I think frankly, that the tech oligarchs don't want that. They don't care about a healthy, information ecosystem. They care about making as much money as possible. They are the monopolists. And the way they want to monopolize things is through an information monopoly.
And if I can just ask you one more question, because if I can link this back to the beginning of our conversation when I mentioned your blog post where you talk about the society that we're in right now is the goldfish brain society. I do think that every person can actually play a role in terms of this battle that's happening right now when we talk about the Internet Archive, because there is so much information there. I mean, individuals can support the Internet Archive as well. And I would encourage people to go on there and start to see what's there, because it is very easy in this world today to forget about our history and forget about all the lessons we've learned, like you talked about. But it's a resource not just for journalists, but I think for all of us.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. And here's a great example of it. When you're reading something that anything from 2, 3, 4 years ago, and you click a link and the link no longer exists, to understand the power of that resource, take the URL, go to the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, put the URL into the field, click enter, and there's a good chance, not a 100% chance, but a good chance you're going to actually find that information, that old link, the link that's dead now, you will actually find that information. And you will see instantly the power of historical preservation, why we should want it. Something disappeared, but actually it didn't disappear. It's right there, and you can glean something from that. I mean, I have kids who were, they're in high school and middle school. I want them to be able to learn history. I don't want them to be existing in a world of dead internet links where they can't ever find what happened 5, 10, 15 years ago because the link is dead. I want them to be able to have, to be able to access an archive that if they want to learn a particular thing, they are able to learn it.
And it's super important. I'm reminded of having Margaret Atwood, of course, the literary icon in our studio a couple of years ago. And I asked her about the importance of history and what's happening today. Why don't people seem to care about history, especially the younger generation? And she said, the problem right now with this generation is that they think history started the day they were born. And it's always made me laugh because I think you're exactly right as a parent. I think we want our kids to be able to look back and really be able to witness our history, which is increasingly taking place online. Finally, David, just before I let you go, where can people follow your incredible work?
So you can find us at The Lever, which is at levernews.com. We do investigative journalism. And I should say, since we're talking about history, we have a series out now on audio. It's a podcast series. It's called Master Plan. And actually, the thrust of the series is there's a problem here in the present, and we tell you the story of how that problem was created. The first season was about the legalization of corruption, the 50-year plot in the United States to legalize corruption effectively. We are not an endemically corrupt political system in the United States just because Donald Trump decided to do what he's doing. There is a plot. He is a culmination. It's the same thing in our new season 2, which is about presidential power. How did the American presidency become a monarchy? It didn't just happen that Donald Trump became president and decided to become a king. It is part of it is a culmination of a historical story. So when I tell you that I am relying on the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine, I really mean it every single day to try to tell that story. We are relying on the historical record to resurface what actually happened, to show how what happened in the past led to where we are in the present, to make sure we don't necessarily go in the same direction in the future.
Well, David, thank you so much. I just signed the letter, and thank you for all your amazing work out there. Really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, David and Amber. Coming up next, we speak to one of the creators of Inside American Pie, which takes us on a journey of one of the most famous songs in modern history.
You're listening to The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Mike Ross and an incredible band of Prince Edward Island musicians are making headlines in Toronto and around the world with their docu-concert Inside American Pie, which started at Harmony House in beautiful Hunter River, Prince Edward Island. This show creatively unpacks the stories from Don McLean's hit song and takes audiences on a musical journey from the 1950s through the 1960s. Amber spoke to Mike in our Toronto studio just a couple days after seeing the hit show.
Thank you so much for coming to the studio.
I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I have to say, I didn't know a lot about your show until I actually sat down in the theater with my good friend Erica M. And I was absolutely blown away. So let's kind of start at the beginning. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, I have been working in the format that we call docu-concert for a long time. So it's like it's just what the term is. It combines documentary and concert, and it's we take a story, we've made a bunch of them, that anything that has music at its center, and then we try to tell the story of that thing, and then all the while using music to deepen the experience and how we interpret the music, which is usually familiar to the audience, but we're doing it in a different way based on wherever the story is headed. And so, when I was 12 years old, and I was obsessed with the song American Pie. We had the cassette, and I would say from the back of the car, "Could you put American Pie in?" And they would, and my parents. And then I wanted to learn all the words. I was obsessed with learning not because I wanted to know what they meant. I just liked the way they all tumbled together. And then, the years went by, I grew up, and it just was the perfect opportunity to do one of these docu-concerts, because there's so much rich musical history embedded cryptically within the song. So it became, and over the years, we've had different versions of it. And anyway, that's kind of how it came to be.
How do you go about figuring out what stories you want to tell? Because I imagine that it is like going down a rabbit hole when you start to do some of this research and start to piece things together.
Yeah, it's sometimes, you look at something and you just start to investigate it. And in some cases, you realize quickly, I don't think this one has it, and then other cases, you're surprised by how much is actually in this, whatever the seed material is. And so we're always just sort of like going through a process of seeing if this, for example, like, we've done a show about the 27 Club and all the artists who died at the age of 27, and not just a biography on those artists, but why did this happen? Why isn't there a 26 Club? Why isn't there a 28 Club? And so the lots of ideas like that. We've looked at, Laurel Canyon in the 1960s in California, and just something that has, the heartbeat of music at its center. And then we start to research the world around it. And if it's got legs, if we feel like the song choices that we put inside that idea are going to be interesting to interpret based on whatever the story is, then we really start to go. And so that's how we pick them. And but this one it's really good for it. Like it has so much. And I think that was the thing, if anything, I was the most surprised by, is I knew there was already a lot of stuff in it, but when we really started to take it apart line by line, my co-writer and I, Sarah Wilson, it was richer than I even thought. Like everything has its place in the song, and you can't find a line that is fat. Everything is purposeful.
One of the things that really impressed me is just that it felt also like a journey through our musical history. Yeah. So starting in the late 50s, going into the 60s, I went to school. I was a King student, and at Dal, I studied Bob Dylan and literature of the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
And so, it was a fascinating time in music. And many of these songs that you sing throughout the performance, I mean, there's so much in terms of historical references and conflict and the challenges of that time. So does that period of time also excite you along with the song itself?
Yeah, I think the 1960s, I don't want to put anything down that's happening now. I love it all. But there was just something, I think sometimes art meets a moment. And in the 1960s, there was a coming of age of the singer-songwriter who really believed that they could say something that mattered. And that they had the ear of the audience to do that, and that it really was an opportunity to make change through art. And that's what we all want to be doing, right? But there was just something about how the art form of the troubadour and the historical events that were all happening through that time, they met each other in a really, really significant way. And so I think, and then I think that if you were a singer-songwriter back then, you saw that happening, and then you were empowered. Like, I can do this. I can, and so the way the music business worked back then and everything, it all kind of came together and empowered this poetic musical moment that was just, you're looking back, it's just a stunning time, and it's so intergenerational. Like, I'm an 80s kid, but when I was in high school, for whatever reason, it was Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and the Beatles that were making their way into my tape deck. It wasn't the 80s music. And that's happening over and over again, so we look out at the audience, and sure, there's a lot of older people that were like alive and, kicking when that song was released, but there's also young people out there too, because that not only the song American Pie, but the time that it reflects really crosses over generations. So it was an incredible time in music.
One of the things I found really fascinating is that a lot of the artists of that time who you tell the stories about, they all knew each other. And as someone who spends my days in the social media space and tech space, it kind of blows me away at the connection among those artists of the 60s. Like, I asked myself the question, how did they keep in touch? How were they able to fall along with each other? How were they able to fall in love? Like, there's just so many of these stories. The effort that went in to these connections is just incredible.
Yeah. I don't know. When you say that, it makes me think about sort of an awareness of the bigger picture that they all had. And they were not siloed off from one another. And I think that, within reason, everybody's got their egos, but I think within reason, the success of this person was a positive thing in their life. It was not a threatening thing. And so there was a rising tide floats all boats thing that they all had. And so they collaborated with one another. Like Laurel Canyon in the 1960s is a great example of a incredibly fertile time where they were literally living together. They were sleeping on each other's couches and they were writing songs together and sharing songs together. And it had a feeling of sharing and a collective effort, and I don't know, like it for all of our connectability today, ironically, that might be something that's also keeping us apart. We all talk about that all the time. And so it's a blessing and a curse, but I don't know how did they, I guess they called each other on phones and, they didn't even have answering machines back then. Right. So they were forced maybe to be in closer proximity with one another, which just led to an osmosis kind of way of sharing and creating and just being part of a kind of karmic collective energy that they drank from, and then this explosion of creativity and art comes out of that.
Well, when we think about creativity in the context of the performance, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is that I know you call it a docu-musical, which was a
docu-concert.
Docu-concert,
yes,
which is a total new term for me in terms of my exposure to anything like that. Now, the first part of that is like a documentary, right? Like the docu-concert piece of it. But in a documentary, typically what you would get is someone kind of telling you what happened, and then you would take that version of what happened. What I love about what you do is totally different, because you give the audience the option to sort of take the stories away with them that they want to. Was that a conscious choice?
Well, it's interpretive, right? I can't say definitively I know what everything means in this song. I can only say I've done a lot of work, and this is what I think, and this is what Sarah thinks, my co-writer. And so it's it forces you to kind of put it into the audience's lap and say, choose your own adventure, but here's what I think, And so I think any great piece of art, it makes you come to it, right? You're not, if you're sitting back and it's kind of like forcing itself upon you or spoon feeding you, like what is explaining to you what it is without you having to do any work, I don't think it has the same impact as when it's inviting you into the middle. And this song is so perfect for that because it feels so purposeful. The song, the energy of the music, it feels so direct and it has such intent, and yet it's poetically cryptic, right? So that is the energy is drawing me in, but I got to come to it if I'm really going to understand what it's trying to say.
Which I think is sort of a different experience than what we may get today. Like, I go to lots of concerts with my son. He's 17 years old. He goes to a concert. He knows the playlist. He's seen them sing the songs.
Yeah.
He knows the backstory of all the songs because someone has unpacked it on social media. Maybe, the artist has used AI to some extent along that journey. I mean, it is a totally different world of creativity, but I really felt like I was transported back to a different time that was totally tech and AI free, which maybe for me was especially special.
Sure.
But I think that is more important today than ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big debate right now, right? It's out, like, to use it or not to use it, to use it to create or not to. And I don't know. I don't know where I stand on that. There's sometimes you just have to accept what is happening and still use your creative brain and these new tools that are out there. But not rely on it in some way, but I think that this show that, why it appeals to folks like you is that it is pretty AI free. Like, it presents itself in a way that's incredibly direct, and it's, the only technology that we're using is microphones and lights, and otherwise it's a campfire. And I think that there's a fundamental nature that we have. Church, campfires, concerts, there's experiencing something collectively that is, like, really made for you. Like, stories are made to be told, and so you want to reduce that to its simplest form if you can, and then that touches that primitive part of you, that's like medicine, and I think that's one of the strengths of the show, is that it just doesn't rely on anything else except the imagination of everybody in the room to all come together and try to figure this thing out together. And then you have music that deepens the experience along the way. So it's head and heart at the same time.
One of the things that also struck me was that people from the East Coast are great storytellers. I think we have seen that historically. And I really felt like, even though the performance was incredible with the lights and being in that theater setting, I almost felt like I was at a kitchen party in PEI. I mean, I really felt that. So when you think about the PEI and the East Coast connection, can you talk a little bit about the origins of that?
Well, the origins of this version of the show is that we were, my wife and I lived here in Toronto for 18 years, and our kids were getting to an age, and I think that the call of the island happens, and you suddenly wake up one day and you start imagining your life there, thinking you'd never go back. And so that happened to us, and our kids were getting to the ages where we had to make a decision, and so we did it. And we moved back in 2020. And we did this music hall came up for sale called Harmony House, and we bought it. It was my wife she's the risk averse one in the family, but she just kept on looking at it. I thought it was crazy at first, and then she got me, and I started thinking, oh, maybe we could do something wild like that, and so we did. And we needed a show to build that would appeal to people, pull them out of the weirdness of the time. It was 2020 after all. And this is the one that we made. And so, it was a great blessing that the one that we picked to go first really popped. And so that's where the show really started to pick up steam. But to your question about the kitchen party thing, the audience, if you're listening, tells you what they want. And an East Coast audience, in some ways, I think it's less about us and those sensibilities, and it's more about trying to imagine what East Coasters want. And so because of that, my awareness of that, the simplicity of the storytelling and the presentation was key. And so, just like you sitting around in the kitchen and tell that story you've told 15 times before, but we all want to hear it again. We were aware of the audience's desire for that sort of thing. Just tell us a good story. And it really, and yes, in this age of technology and everything, it's refreshing. Because it really is nothing more than sounds coming out of somebody's mouth that means something to a brain in the audience, and that moves your heart or it captures your imagination, and it's really entertainment or art at its very basic form. And I think that for all of the complaining about AI and art and everything, it also presents an opportunity, that you can now actually do something that's refreshing if that's not your thing, And so I think that's where we're living at the moment.
Well, we're seeing actually this return to analog among even a younger generation.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've seen it with your kids, but
I have.
This desire, like my son has Walkmans, he's into sort of old Polaroid cameras, and we want these simpler things. Not to say that the tech isn't important. I mean, it's incredibly innovative, and we couldn't live without a lot of it. But there is something about the human experience that is unique. That we can't get away from that as much as some of these tech leaders want us to try.
No, and I think we'll return to it. And that's the opportunity that I'm talking about. Like, it will always be there. And for every time I see some weird AI thing that, and we're starting to see it. That's what's interesting. I mean, I know you talk about this stuff all the time, but our collective brains are starting to be able to spot it. Even when it's extremely well done, you kind of go, oh, there's something not human about that, even though it's perfect. It sounds, looks real, but we can identify it. And so it then creates an anti to that. And so it's an opportunity, to live outside of that world and stand out, because you're actually the unique thing now, because there's so much of that happening.
I was curious how many people have asked you to do the same treatment to other songs. How often does that happen when people write you like, oh, you got to take this song and you got to create something around this song?
It does happen. It happened that night you were there. There was there was a gentleman who came up to me and said, Desolation Row by Bob Dylan. You got to take that one apart. And it does happen. But it's a tough one. Like, top of the list is American Pie. Like, there are other songs that I just don't know if they would hold a whole show the way American Pie does, or does, and then the song itself has to have a reverence that's universal in order for it. Because there's other ones that are really interesting, but they're not widely known, and so it's a kind of a perfect storm of knownness in the song, and then being able to hold an entire show. But yes, I do get people. I get people saying all kinds of stuff to me about the show. People telling me I'm wrong about stuff. People, and a couple of the things have made their way into the show. Some people have come up to me and said things that were so interesting that I was like, I believe that. I can't. I gotta put it in there.
Yeah. So it's kind of living and breathing and evolving.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say, there's lots of people who listen to our show who maybe aren't able to see your show in Toronto.
Sure.
So what are kind of the options for them? It is playing for the next couple of weeks.
Yes, it is.
And then in the future, where do things go?
I don't know. Keep your eye out. It does seem like it has a life, and if you want to come to Toronto to see it, then you're more than welcome. And yes, that's really all I know at this point. We just got back from the UK. We played it over there and they liked it. And step by step, just trying to see where it might go. And it's an exciting thing to feel all that. But I also like living in PEI, and it's pulling me away from this place that I love. So all those things got to be measured. But I would say, keep your eye out, if you're somewhere else. And I would like to think that the show is going to make its way around.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
And I'll see you in PEI this summer.
I can't wait.
Thanks, Mike and Amber. Inside American Pie is playing at the CAA Theatre on Yonge Street in Toronto for the next couple of weeks, so you can catch that. And it's great to have, another Islander on the podcast, aside from just me and Amber. And thank you so much for listening. Coming up next week, we've got a deep dive into the truth about electric vehicles and your thoughts on the future of smart glasses.
We had so many comments from listeners and followers on this topic of smart glasses. So thank you so much to everybody who contributed. And thank you all for listening this week. Remember, you can check out our segments in video form over on YouTube at Amber Mac, as well as listening on SiriusXM and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you soon.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.